So when I was 19, I casually dated this guy named Casey that I'd met through a mutual friend. We hit it off the first time we met and hung out for hours. He was incredibly charming and we had quite a lot in common as well. I was definitely, even at the start though, getting an off vibe. The day after we hung out, my friend texted me, warning me not to get too involved with him because he was kind of a psycho. I ignored his warning, which is something I came to regret to this very day. My friend wouldn't elaborate though, no matter how many times I asked, so I shrugged it off as probably nothing that extreme. Surely he'd tell me if it was, right? Casey and I were by no means serious. He said he planned on seeing other girls and didn't even want to call me his girlfriend. I appreciated his straightforwardness, though my feelings were very hurt by this. I told myself that maybe if we got closer he would change his mind, but as I spent more and more time with him, I began to see exactly what my friend had been talking about. He had some serious anger issues. He would do things like throw plates against the wall if something wasn't fully cooked in the microwave, and casually talk about how on bad days, he fantasized about going on a shooting spree and getting away with it. I finally broke up with him after he told me in a fit of rage that he wished he could shove a fire poker down the neighbor's dog's throat so it would never bark again. Altogether, our fling lasted less than 5 months. He kept on trying to convince me to date him again in the following months though. Obviously, I kept telling him no way. Eventually, I started dating my now husband. Casey made one last attempt to get me back by showing up at my apartment to tell me he was in love with me, and if he couldn't have me, then life was not worth living. He told me if I didn't let him in and try to work things out, he would shoot himself in the head. Since he had a gun on him, I was terrified of what he could do. I had no idea how to handle this situation, so I let him inside with the intention of keeping him as calm as I could. I texted one of his friends to come grab him and help him. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what happened after, but he kept on trying to kiss me, and when I made it clear we weren't going to be intimate, he beat the shit out of me. He left me bleeding and crying on the ground. I didn't tell my then boyfriend about this because I didn't want them to have an altercation. I made up excuses why I couldn't see him for weeks until all my marks had healed up. I had to tell my coworkers I was in a bike crash, but I could tell no one really believed that. Casey texted me apologizing, said he loved me so much that he'd snapped because he needed me. He tried to frame his violence as some kind of fucked up romantic gesture. I told him to never come near me again and threatened to call the cops as well. I was scared shitless for over a year that he would come back and attack me and kill me. After that incident though, I didn't hear from him again. Fast forward to 6 years later. At this point, my husband and I had married and just had our first kid. She was 5, and we were fostering her with the intention of adopting her. We lived in a new state several hours away. Somehow, that I really can't figure out, Casey figured out I had a daughter. He messaged me on Facebook, saying he knew I had a daughter, and she must be his. I tried to explain that she was not my biological child, but he insisted I was lying, and she looked exactly like him. She wasn't even the same race, by the way. He's white with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she's Hispanic. I told him he was crazy, blocked him, and deleted all my photos of her from Facebook. My account was completely private. I even double-checked all my settings and my links to make sure there was no access, so I have no clue how he even got that information. Another few weeks went by without contact. I was feeling quite confident that was the last I'd ever hear from him, but I was so wrong. He showed up at my house, begging to talk. He looked like shit, and had clearly developed a serious drug habit over the years, far beyond just weed from the old days. His face was so pale, and he had these dark rings around his eyes. He was so shaky. My husband wasn't there, so I was pretty terrified. He begged me to meet her. Once again, I emphasized she was not my biological child, and told him he needed to stay away from my family or I would call the police. He started on this whole unhinged tangent about how we belong together, and it wasn't fair for me to keep punishing him for not realizing that sooner. He went on about how after he'd found out about her, God told him while he was on meth that he needed to quit everything and get clean so he could be with me and raise our daughter. I just slammed the door in his face and told him I was calling the cops. He shouted back I couldn't keep him away from this child forever. I called the police and all they did was file a report, told me there was nothing they could do unless he threatened or harmed one of us. Well, about 3 months later, one day my daughter didn't come home on the bus like usual. I called the school, only for them to say she had been picked up by her dad. As you can imagine, the next few hours were complete and total hell on earth. My husband came home early from work, and we had to wait at the house with a cop and detective in case he took her home, while the other cops searched for them. The detective told me that from everything I'd told him, he didn't think he was at risk of harming her or fleeing with her. Luckily, he was right. They were found at a McDonald's, and he was arrested quickly, while my daughter was taken to the hospital. Thankfully, she hadn't been harmed physically. It was incredibly awkward to have to explain to a 5-year-old why a strange man she'd never met was telling her he was her dad. The prosecution was also insanely lenient on him due to his mental health issues and drug problem, coupled with the fact he hadn't harmed her. They ended up dropping all serious charges like kidnapping a minor and sentenced him to stay at a state hospital until he was deemed healthy enough to be let out, which ended up only being 4 months. They granted us a restraining order that lasted 2 years, but we were assured if he contacted any of us again, we would no doubt be able to get another one. It's 4 years later, and we haven't heard from him since. My daughter wasn't traumatized or anything, just saw it as a strange experience she had as a child. Me though? I still have intense anxiety every time the doorbell rings. My husband bought a shotgun immediately after this went down. I've heard through the grapevine that Casey has been mostly clean besides being an alcoholic now. It's an upgrade from meth at least, I guess. He seems to be less batshit insane. That's nice, but I really hope I never see that man again for the rest of my life. This story goes back a few years ago, when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day, I'd walk the 25 to 30-minute journey to and from school. There was this shortcut I could take home that would take some time off the walk, and as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable as well. Whenever I'd walk home, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest we have in this medium-sized, moderately busy city I live in. It was pretty well traveled, and I would occasionally see other people walking from their neighborhood toward the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from high school or college as well. Sometimes, though, there would be no one else but me on this path. To give you an idea, it was definitely not well groomed or anything, but it was traveled enough that you could make out a distinct path from being trampled over the years. It started off from the busy road by my high school, then went into a low-lying, open wooded area with some small ponds around. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up the big hill towards the parallel street to my street. One day, I happened to be walking home from school after staying a bit late for some extra help. A few minutes into my shortcut, I noticed a guy sort of standing off the main path a bit, minding his own business seemingly while talking on a cell phone. There was an open backpack sitting on the ground by his feet. I suppose this wasn't unusual by any means, since the entire low-lying area was traveled, and there were numerous paths off the main path leading different directions. It wasn't really a thick forest or anything, so it was sort of like a free-for-all for people walking. Sometimes people would just stand off the busy road while waiting for the bus to come by or something, not wanting to stand in all the traffic fumes while people sped by during rush hour. The only thing I took distinct note of was that I had been seeing him there a few times that week, and I had never seen him before previously. Oh well though, maybe he was a new college student, or just moved into the area or something. This time, walking on that shortcut felt different though, possibly because there was no one else on the path with me today. I started to get this bad feeling in my stomach. Something was not right. I was already well along into the shortcut though. I decided to blame my feelings on just being paranoid. Not like I could do much about it at this point anyway. I kept an eye on the man as I walked past. He continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious in any way. I continued to go on and thought it must be nothing. I must have walked about 30 meters away when the man suddenly stopped talking on his phone. I got an even bigger feeling of dread in my gut. I turned around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth and a brown glass bottle. Before I even had a second to register what the fuck this man was doing, his head shot up in my direction. The look on his eyes was a terrifying mix between "I've been caught" and "I can't stop now." He dropped everything, leaving his shit behind, and started sprinting right for me, cloth in his hand. At this point, I was too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me with this crazy fuck, and I was too far away to scream bloody murder either. My first instinct in that split second was to run towards my neighborhood. I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack on the ground and sprinting as fast as I could, starting up the hill towards my neighborhood. Judging solely by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in half with no effort. I trusted my flight response much more than fight in this moment. Plus, I didn't know what the fuck that could be in his hand. All throughout school, I had been top cross-country and track runner out of the female and male teams. My running had been my savior in a few other occasions, but soon into the chase, I knew it wasn't going to be enough this time. This guy was fast as shit. I could tell he was gaining on me without even having to look back. I finally saw some fenced-in yards up ahead and was hoping some people were home from work. I started trying to scream as much as I could with my out-of-breath and useless voice. I made the split decision to start jumping fences into people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills were much crappier than his running. It seemed like the first fence threw him off a bit, but by the second into the next yard, he was right on my ass. I felt like he'd almost grabbed my leg. I was shitting myself at this point. No cars in driveways, no sign of anyone home. The only thing keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state was thinking I may never see my family or friends again. The next yard, though, belonged to people I knew rather well, including their dog. With that next yard and my newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt as much hope as I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they'd let their dog out in the backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo, the dog, saw me frantically running towards him, he started wagging his tail. Immediately after, he looked at the guy chasing close behind me, and he started going crazy. I thought this would be enough to get the guy to get the fuck off of me, but no, he started to jump over the fence just after I did. The dog jumped up though, and his teeth sank into the guy's face as that creep fell backwards into the other yard, straight onto his ass. I fell into the dog's yard on mine as well. The creep and I stared at each other, out of breath for a few moments. The dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was assessing if he could take on Leo or not. I prayed the creep didn't have a knife or something. The guy looked angrier than I'd ever seen a person. After a few seconds, he got up and started running back down the hill from where we'd come. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock. I couldn't move until my little hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it, ran to the back door, and started pounding. Obviously, they weren't home, or they would have probably heard what had just gone down. My house was close enough, thankfully, so I jumped the fence and ran the rest of the way home. Then I called the cops to investigate and try and find the guy. I gave them the best description I could after coming face to face with the man. The dude's bag was gone though, and so was every trace of them. They also found my poor knapsack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me they'd keep on looking. I never saw that guy again, and I didn't hear anything more about it. After calling the office a few more times, I gave up. They told me during that time they had received several sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, nothing quite like mine though. Over the last few months, there were also a few missing persons cases. In a city like the one I'm from though, not the worst and not the best. You can never connect anything like that for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, the more fucked up it is, and the more confused I am. First of all, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch into the forest before I had the chance to get away, or before another trail goer could have possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon or anything on him either, except for that creepy cloth. My friend thought it must have been chloroform. I did some research on it, and apparently it's more of a myth that pouring on a rag and covering a person's face causes them to faint quickly. It actually takes quite a long time. Plus, where the hell did he get it anyway? He didn't seem very prepared for his impromptu kidnapping. Thanks to that asshole though, I never walked that shortcut anymore, without at least 2 friends and some pepper spray or some sort of protection. So I work at a pizza place, usually inside, as my insurance does not cover claims when driving for business. Occasionally though, I'll cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers because the money is very good. Our delivery area includes a few new development upper middle class cookie cutter neighborhoods, usually bad tips. An older 1940s era village, average tips, 2 apartment complexes where you get great tips, and some trailer parks where you might get no tips. There's also a few rural areas. Not rural or anything to the point where you could see all the stars at night, but enough that you couldn't hear your neighbors yelling or anything. About a week ago, I was covering a delivery shift. I come back to the shop feeling pretty good. I was averaging $5 a delivery, and they'd all been pretty close by. I checked to see if I had any more on the list. I had one to this address I had never seen before. We usually only got semi-regulars as deliveries, so an address that I wasn't the least bit familiar with was quite odd. It was out on one of the more rural roads. I asked the kid who'd taken the order what was up, because there were special instructions on the ticket as well. They said to go around back because the front door doesn't work. Okay, that's not that uncommon, I suppose. People often want you to go around back. Either they just painted the door or the house is shifted and it's a bitch to open or something. Maybe they're just hanging out back with their friends. As I'm driving out to the house though, I started to get an odd feeling. I didn't really like the idea of going to the back of some house way out here in the sticks. It would be all too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house and then jump the delivery guy. There were quite a few in the more rural areas. I figured I'd just scope the place out when I got there, and if it seemed sketchy, I'd just call them and make up some bull about how it was against company policy to go around the back of houses to prevent robberies. As I was driving further, I realized it was toward the end of this road that got less and less populated the further down you went. Great. I was getting pretty near the address now, driving slower. All of a sudden, I see this house, completely abandoned looking, set back from the roads with no address on it, in the middle of a bunch of trees. I think to myself, that better not be the fucking house. I drove past and checked the next house's address. Lo and behold, that abandoned-looking house was the right one. Shit. At this point, I was not super worried though. Out in the boonies, the standards of upkeep on your house are pretty low, so a house in disrepair isn't that unusual. I double back over to this house and pull into the driveway. I was getting really bad vibes. Something was not right here. I parked my car at the very end of the driveway, with the rear on the shoulder so anyone passing by could clearly see it. At this point, I called back to the shop and told them this was quite sketchy. If I didn't call back in 4 or 5 minutes, call me, and if I didn't answer, call the cops right away. While I was calling in, I took a chance to take a better look at the house. It looked extremely abandoned, not just in disrepair. The driveway was crumbling, bits of gravel and weeds were growing out of it. There was no mailbox either. No trash cans, no car, no lawnmowers, no landscaping. Absolutely nothing to indicate anyone lived here. It looked like the yard hadn't been mowed in years, almost like a jungle. The house was total crap as well. The roof was falling apart, the siding was falling apart, the back deck which came around the side was falling apart too. The only part of the house, in fact, that looked even a little bit decent was the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows were all completely shut. Well, the few that weren't boarded up at least. I didn't see any wires running to this house either. It was not dark, but it was dusk. Not a single sign of light in the house. I was getting pretty nervous at this point. I'm a 5'10" male, 180 pounds. Not in particularly great shape, but I did take karate for 10 years. I'm not completely helpless, but I avoid any sort of fights if I can. I'm mostly a pacifist anyway. I would rather not get robbed, but I was mostly worried about getting jumped and killed. It was a fairly safe area, but recently there had been some unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies. More worrying, a few stabbings and assaults as well. Now it was either time to nut up or shut up. I was not going to just go charging in there like a fool though. I got out my phone and called the number they'd given when ordering. While doing so, I got the pizza out as well and made sure to leave my door open. A running car half in the road and an abandoned house with the door open looked suspicious, right? I figured if any shit went down, it might look out of place enough to make someone stop. Not that there's any real traffic this far down this road. I was starting to walk up to the house while the phone was ringing. Rings twice, then an automated message comes on. It said something along the lines that this phone number was associated with an internet texting app. I think Haywire perhaps. This was a huge red flag. My heart was pounding in my throat. Everything was telling me to bail. I didn't want to get a reputation for being a flaky bitch-ass driver though and lose all future delivery shifts, which is why I had not bailed yet. I'm just standing there holding this pizza, looking at this haunted house or whatever, not wanting to venture around the back of it. I was hoping the resident would just look out the window and come out by the road to grab it. I'm looking at the front windows, checking for any sign of life. I see a blind go up on one of the windows next to the front door, and this really creepy guy, hat pulled low and big sunglasses, looking out at me. There was no reason for him to be wearing sunglasses when it was this dark. There also appeared to be a giant guy standing behind him in the room. It could have been anything, I suppose. When he saw me looking, he mouthed something and darted away, presumably toward the allegedly broken front door. At this point, I noped the fuck out. I had stayed pretty close to my car anyway, so it was only a few steps away. I jumped into the driver's seat, threw the pizza into the passengers, something I would never do since I'm really anal about keeping my car clean, and slammed it in reverse. Without looking, I simultaneously slammed and locked my door, floored it backwards onto the main road, and slipped my clutch horribly. At this point, I didn't care though. I didn't want to fuck around and risk a stall. I didn't even check for cross traffic. Really stupid on my part, I know. I started to drive away and looked back at the house. The screen door on the outside of the front door was now open, but the front was shut still. The guy wasn't out in the yard yelling, "Wait, come back," or anything like that. It seemed he had just disappeared. I pulled over a little ways up the road to call back to the shop and tell them I was all good. I'd elaborate fully when I got back. Those people never called back to inquire about their food or anything. Usually people would call if their pizza was just 15 minutes late, and these people never even got it. It was really strange they never said anything. Pretty much confirmed they were up to no good in my mind. After telling my coworkers about it, we concluded it was definitely a robbery at the very least. We put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list and ate their pizza ourselves. I doubt I would have gotten murdered or anything. Maybe robbed with a gun pulled out or a little roughing up, sure. It was still unnerving though. I could have easily gotten into some serious trouble just by doing my job, especially if those idiots had picked a slightly less abandoned house to set up at. This happened in my hometown when I was 7. I'm 36 now. For context, I lived on an island just off the coast of Washington State, in a military town that's among one of the safest places to live in all of the US. Still though, I suppose weirdos are everywhere. Timing is vague for me, but since I was outside playing with my friends, I guess it was likely a summer evening just before dinner time. We were screwing around riding our bikes in the street, running around and doing the usual kid stuff, when a car pulled up and stopped right across the middle of the street. I don't remember exactly what the man driving it said, but he must have beckoned me over, because next thing I know, I had walked close enough to hear more. The man asked me if I had seen other kids wandering around this place, because his kids were missing. I noticed that there was also a woman in the car with him. I assumed she must be the mom if he was the dad. I told him I hadn't seen them wandering around, but there was a park nearby around the corner, and he might be able to find them there. The man asked if I would be willing to get in his car and show them where this park was. Although I didn't understand just how dangerous this was, I was well aware of the whole stranger danger thing, so of course I said no. The man asked again if I would please get in the car and help him find his children at this park. I told him no once more. I couldn't do that. I did give him directions though, and skipped off to continue playing with my friends, who were standing there watching the whole time. The man just drove away. A few minutes later, my mom came outside to call me in for dinner. I bounced happily up the driveway to tell her I just helped someone out. I was very proud and excited to have helped out an adult. I explained the whole situation to her. I could see her face change, but she just nervously said, "That's very nice of you, hon." I felt a surge of pride within me. When my dad came home, my mom obviously told him what had happened. His reaction was much different. He told me although he was proud I liked to help people, I was never ever to approach anyone I didn't know like that again. Adults should never be asking children for help. He told me I was very lucky I hadn't gotten snatched, and to always remember it, because they would have lost me forever if things had gone badly. He was very stern, which did hurt my ego a bit, and I lost a tiny bit of innocence that day.